Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, The Journey Begins. The coach departed from the edge of London just after sunrise, when the city still seemed undecided about waking fully. The streets were quieter than usual, washed pale by the early light, and the air held the promise of a mild summer day. For most of the passengers, the journey was simply a means to an end, a short escape from work, routine, and obligation. For 6 of them, seated together halfway down the coach, it was meant to be something more, a celebration of friendship. Simon Blake stood briefly in the aisle, counting heads with exaggerated seriousness before dropping into his seat with a grin. He was a man of 35, neatly dressed, with an easy confidence that made others comfortable placing responsibility in his hands. It was Simon who had planned the trip, booked the coach, chosen the walking routes through the Menham Downs, and insisted that everyone needed a proper break. Beside him sat his younger sister, Clara. She was quieter than Simon, her manner thoughtful, her eyes observant. While the others chatted, Clara looked out of the window, noting the passing streets as though committing them to memory. She smiled when spoken to, but rarely volunteered words of her own. Across the aisle, Gerald Fenton was already talking loudly about how badly London traffic had become, despite the fact that the coach had left without delay. A solicitor by profession, Gerald carried himself with the confidence of a man used to being listened to. His wife, Miriam, sat next to him, hands folded neatly in her lap. She was well-dressed, reserved, and watchful. When Gerald spoke, she listened. When others spoke, she listened even more carefully. A few rows behind them sat Oliver Reed, a thin, serious-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses. A schoolmaster by trade, Oliver had brought a small guidebook to the countryside, which he read with earnest concentration. He nodded politely when Simon joked with him, but soon returned to his book, as though words on a page were safer company. And then there was Daniel Crowe. Daniel sat alone by the window, one leg stretched into the aisle, his expression impatient. He was handsome in a restless way, dark-haired and sharp-eyed, but there was an edge to him that made others slightly uneasy. He joined the laughter when it suited him, but his remarks often landed a little too hard. More than once, Clara noticed how conversation shifted after Daniel spoke, as if everyone needed a moment to recover. They had been friends for years, some since university, others through work, but recently, something had changed. It showed in the pauses between words, in the glances that flicked away too quickly, in the careful politeness that replaced easy familiarity. None of them spoke of it openly. At the front of the coach, separated from the group by several empty seats, sat a small man with an air of quiet precision. His clothes were immaculate, his shoes polished to a mirror-like shine. His moustache, perfectly waxed, curved upward at the ends with almost artistic care. Hercule Poirot had chosen this coach deliberately, hoping for a peaceful journey and a view of the countryside that might soothe his mind. Peace, however, was rarely as simple as one hoped. Poirot did not intrude. He did not stare. He merely observed. He noticed how Simon naturally assumed command, how Gerald interrupted others, how Miriam's eyes followed Daniel whenever he spoke. He noticed Oliver's nervous habit of adjusting his glasses, and Clara's stillness, which was not shyness but attentiveness. Most of all, he noticed Daniel Crowe. There was energy in the man, but it was restless, unsettled. Poirot had seen that look before, ambition mixed with resentment, confidence edged with bitterness. It was the look of a man who felt owed something. The coach moved steadily out of the city and into open country. Fields replaced buildings, hedgerows replaced walls, and the sky widened above them. Spirits lifted slightly. Simon passed around a bag of pastries. Gerald joked. Miriam smiled faintly. Even Daniel seemed momentarily satisfied, drumming his fingers against the glass as they passed rolling hills. Nearly 2 hours into the journey, the coach slowed unexpectedly. There was a cough from the engine, a judder, and then the vehicle came to a halt on a narrow country road flanked by hedges and open fields. The driver stood and cleared his throat. "Apologies, ladies and gentlemen. Bit of trouble with the engine. Shouldn't take more than 20 minutes. There was mild irritation, but no real concern. The weather was pleasant, the delay minor. Passengers stretched their legs. Some stepped outside to admire the view. The 6 friends gathered loosely near the coach, conversation scattered. Daniel was the first to walk away, heading toward the hedgerow with a sharp, irritated movement. Oliver followed a few moments later, hesitating before stepping into the grass. Simon remained near the coach, speaking with the driver. Clara watched them all. Miriam stayed seated inside, her face pale. Gerald lit a cigarette and wandered a short distance down the road. Poirot stepped down carefully, his polished shoes touching the gravel. He inhaled the countryside air with approval, then frowned slightly. Something was wrong. Not visibly, not yet, but the balance of the moment felt disturbed. When the driver called out that they would be leaving shortly, people began to return. One by one, they took their seats. One seat remained empty. "Daniel!" Simon called, half annoyed, half amused. "Don't be dramatic." There was no answer. A shout came from the field, Oliver's voice, thin with shock. They found Daniel Crowe beyond the hedge, lying unnaturally still, his body twisted at an angle that spoke instantly of death. Beside him lay a heavy stone, darkened with blood. Silence fell, complete and terrible. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. The journey, he knew, had reached its true destination. Chapter 2, After the Stop. For several seconds after the body was discovered, no one moved. The open countryside, which moments earlier had felt wide and generous, now seemed to press inward. Even the birds had fallen silent. Daniel Crowe lay exactly where he had fallen, one arm bent awkwardly beneath him, his face turned partly into the grass. There was no doubt life had left him instantly. The driver reacted first. Pale and shaken, he instructed everyone to remain near the coach and fetched the emergency telephone from the cab. His voice trembled as he spoke to the authorities, giving their location with uncertain precision. The road had no clear name, only a narrow stretch between 2 villages, bordered by hedgerows and fields that offered little comfort now. Simon Blake stood rigid, staring at Daniel's body as though unable to accept its reality. When Clara touched his arm, he flinched. "He was alive 10 minutes ago," Simon said hoarsely. "This doesn't make sense." Gerald Fenton exhaled sharply and turned away. "Good God," he muttered. "This is a nightmare." Miriam remained seated inside the coach, her face colorless. She had not gone near the field. Her hands were clenched tightly in her lap, her knuckles white, as if she feared that any movement might cause her to fall apart entirely. Oliver Reed, who had discovered the body, looked close to collapse. He leaned heavily against the hedge, one hand gripping the leaves for support. His glasses sat crooked on his nose, and he kept repeating in a low, stunned voice, "I didn't touch him. I swear, I didn't touch him." Hercule Poirot approached the scene with measured steps. He did not kneel beside the body, nor did he disturb anything. Instead, he stood a short distance away and looked, not only at Daniel, but at the ground around him, the angle of the body, the trampled grass. The blow had been forceful. The stone was heavy. This was no accident. Poirot's eyes lifted to the faces of those present. Shock, yes. Fear, certainly. But shock could be worn like a mask. "The police will come," Poirot said gently, his calm voice cutting through the panic. Until then, it is best that nothing is moved. No one argued. When the local inspector arrived, the road was sealed off with quiet efficiency. The body was examined, notes were taken, and the passengers were separated as much as the narrow roadside allowed. The inspector was a practical man, brisk but not unkind. He listened carefully as the driver explained the breakdown and the stop. No passing vehicles, the inspector asked. None that I saw, the driver replied. It's a quiet road. No strangers walking nearby. The driver shook his head. The inspector frowned and turned toward the group of friends. Then we are dealing with a very limited circle. A silence followed, heavy and uncomfortable. The friends were questioned one by one. Simon spoke first. He explained that he had stayed near the coach, speaking to the driver about the delay. Clara confirmed this, adding that she had remained close as well, watching the road. Gerald admitted that he had walked a little distance away to smoke. I wanted some air, he said. I didn't see Daniel after he left the road. Miriam stated quietly that she had remained inside the coach the entire time. I felt unwell, she added, though she did not explain further. Oliver's account came last. His voice shook as he described following Daniel into the field. He was annoyed about something, Oliver said. I thought he wanted to argue. We spoke briefly, and then he walked ahead. I turned back. I swear it. The inspector made notes, his expression unreadable. Poirot listened. Always, he listened. There were no obvious lies, but there were small gaps, moments glossed over, details smoothed too neatly. Poirot had learned long ago that truth rarely flowed in straight lines. As the morning wore on, arrangements were made to move everyone to the nearest village inn while the investigation continued. The coach would not be going anywhere soon. Inside the inn, the friends were shown into a private sitting room. The walls were lined with faded landscapes, and the air smelled faintly of Polish and old wood. Tea was brought, though few touched it. Gerald paced. This is absurd, he said sharply. We're being treated like criminals. We're being treated like witnesses, Clara replied calmly. Miriam sat very still, her eyes fixed on the cup in front of her. Oliver sat apart, shoulders hunched, as though trying to make himself smaller. Poirot took a seat near the window. From there, he could see everyone clearly. One by one, the inspector returned to ask further questions. Was Daniel on good terms with all of you? He asked. There was hesitation. He could be difficult, Simon admitted. Lately, yes, there had been arguments. About what? Money, Gerald said before Simon could answer. He was always borrowing. Always dissatisfied. Miriam looked up sharply at that but said nothing. Poirot's ears pricked up. Later, when the inspector stepped out to make a call, Poirot spoke softly. You were friends, he said. But friendship, like all things, changes. Clara met his gaze. Daniel enjoyed knowing things about people, she said. Things they would rather keep quiet. A dangerous talent, Poirot thought. When the inspector returned, his tone was firmer. This was no accident, he said. Given the location, the timing, and the lack of outsiders, we must consider that the killer was among you. The words hung in the air. Oliver's breath caught. Miriam pressed her hands together. Gerald stopped pacing. Simon swallowed. Are you saying one of us? I am saying, the inspector replied, that no one is above suspicion. Poirot nodded slightly. As evening approached, the group was informed they would remain at the inn overnight. Travel was out of the question. Statements would continue in the morning. One by one, they left the sitting room. Poirot remained behind for a moment, alone. He looked at the empty chairs, the untouched tea, the tension still lingering in the air. 6 friends had set out together. Only 5 remained. And among them, Poirot was certain, sat the one who had turned a quiet country road into a place of death. Chapter 3: Threads Beneath Politeness. The following morning arrived with a thin grey light and a stillness that felt unnatural. The village of Mendham Cross was the sort of place that usually greeted the day with ordinary sounds: milk churns, a distant dog barking, the gentle scrape of a broom outside a shop front. Yet at the inn, those small noises seemed far away, as though the building itself were holding its breath. Hercule Poirot awoke early, as was his habit. He dressed with care, smoothing his cuffs, straightening his tie, and giving his moustache the attention it deserved. It was not vanity, not exactly. It was order. And in a world where murder created chaos, order was a form of resistance. Downstairs, the innkeeper served coffee and a simple breakfast in a small parlour. The friends arrived one by one, strained and pale, as though the night had offered no rest. Clara was the first to appear, composed but tired. Oliver followed, looking as if he had barely slept at all. Miriam arrived quietly, her gaze lowered. Gerald came last, already irritated, his voice sharp when he asked for stronger coffee. Simon hovered near the doorway, distracted, as though listening for footsteps in the corridor. The inspector, a man named Hargreaves, entered soon after with a constable and a notebook. His expression suggested he had spent the night thinking too. "We'll take this one step at a time," he said briskly. "I want full clarity about yesterday's stop. Times. Movements. Anything you noticed, no matter how small." Poirot approved. The smallest things, after all, were often the loudest. The friends were questioned separately in a private room off the hall. Poirot was not officially in charge of anything, yet the inspector, having learned who he was, did not object to his quiet presence. Simon was questioned first. He repeated that he had stayed by the coach speaking with the driver. The inspector asked him to describe the conversation. "We talked about the engine," Simon said. "He said it was a belt loose, I think." "Did you leave the coach at any point?" Simon hesitated, barely noticeable. "Only a step or two. To stretch my legs." "How far is of a step or two?" Simon frowned. 5 yards. 10. "I didn't go near the hedge." The inspector's pencil paused, then continued writing. Next came Gerald. He was indignant from the start. "I walked down the road to smoke," he said. "I keep telling you that." "How far?" "Not far. I could still see the coach." "Did you see Daniel Crowe leave?" "Of course. He stormed off like a man determined to be miserable." "Did you see anyone follow him?" Gerald's eyes darted away for a moment. "Oliver went after him. That's all." Then Miriam. Her voice was quiet, controlled. She said she had remained inside the coach because she felt faint. "Why did you feel faint?" Poirot asked gently, though it was not his question to ask. Miriam's fingers tightened around her handkerchief. I dislike breakdowns. Being stranded. It made me anxious." "But you are not usually anxious," Poirot said softly. Her eyes lifted briefly, startled, then dropped again. "Perhaps I am more anxious than people think." Oliver was last. He looked desperate to be believed. "Daniel followed me," Oliver said. He wanted to speak. He said I was avoiding him." "Were you?" the inspector asked. Oliver swallowed. "Yes. Because he enjoyed humiliating people." "What did he say to you in the field?" Oliver's cheeks flushed. "He hinted he knew something about me." "About my school?" About a mistake I made years ago. A mistake, the inspector pressed. Oliver's hands trembled. Nothing criminal. Just something that could ruin me professionally. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Blackmail has many faces, he thought. Sometimes it smiles. When the questioning ended, Inspector Hargreaves sat back, rubbing his chin. So Daniel Crowe had disputes with several of you, he said. Money. Secrets. Threats. That's motive. Motive is a beginning, Poirot murmured. Not an ending. The inspector gave a short, humorless laugh. If you have something useful, Monsieur Poirot, now would be a fine time. Poirot did not answer immediately. He rose and walked to the window of the private room. Outside, the village road curved gently past a row of cottages. It looked harmless. The stop, Poirot said at last. It was not planned, yes? It was the misfortune of the engine. The driver, who had been brought in for further questioning, nodded quickly. That's right, sir. She started coughing. I had to stop. Poirot turned. And you say you did not leave the coach? No, sir. I stayed with the engine. Poirot nodded, then asked calmly, when you stopped, what did you do first? The driver blinked. I told everyone. Then I checked the belt. Then I fetched the toolkit. Poirot's gaze sharpened. You fetched the toolkit, from where? From the storage under the coach. And the passengers could see you? Most of them, yes. Poirot nodded again. It was nothing dramatic. Yet details were building, one brick at a time. Later that afternoon, the police returned to the roadside to examine the scene more carefully. Poirot accompanied them. The grass beyond the hedge had been flattened where Daniel fell, but Poirot noticed something else. The crushed plants were not random. There was a slight track, a suggestion of movement, and most importantly, there was no sign of struggle. He did not fight, Poirot said quietly. The inspector looked at him sharply. Meaning? Meaning he was struck from behind, yes. But also, he did not run. He did not cry out. He did not attempt to defend himself. Poirot's voice remained mild. He was not afraid of the person close to him. Hargreaves frowned. So he knew them. Poirot's eyes moved to the hedgerow, to the road, to the coach's position. Yes, he said. He knew them. Or believed he did. On the return walk, Clara fell into step beside Poirot. She spoke softly, so the others would not hear. You think one of us did it, she said. Poirot glanced at her. I think only what the facts permit. Clara's expression did not change, but her voice tightened. Daniel could be cruel. He enjoyed pulling at loose threads in people's lives. And when one pulls hard enough, Poirot said, something may tear. Back at the inn, the atmosphere grew heavier as the day faded. No one spoke of the trip anymore. They spoke only in guarded questions. How long would the police keep them? Would they be allowed to go home? Would the newspapers find out? Yet beneath those practical concerns lay something more poisonous. Suspicion. When Gerald asked where Simon had been during the stop, again, Simon snapped in reply. When Oliver accidentally knocked a spoon to the floor, Miriam flinched as if it were a gunshot. Clara watched them all, her calmness almost unsettling. Poirot sat quietly with his coffee, listening to the silences between words. He had learned, over many years, that a group of friends could be more dangerous than a room of strangers. Strangers had no history. Friends had memories, shared joys, shared wounds, shared resentments. And Daniel Crowe, it seemed, had collected resentments like trophies. That night, as the inn fell quiet, Poirot remained awake in his room, reviewing what he knew. Daniel had been taken into the field by conversation, not force. The murder weapon, a heavy stone, had been at hand in exactly the right place. The stop had lasted only minutes. The killer had acted quickly and without panic. This was not the act of a man who lost control in rage. This was the act of a man, or woman, who had already decided. Poirot folded his hands and stared at the ceiling. The little grey cells, he murmured, they must work very carefully now. Because somewhere within those 5 surviving friends, the killer was already preparing their next move. Chapter 4, Patterns of Deception. By the 4th day since the journey had ended in tragedy, the inn at Mentham Cross no longer felt like a place of rest. It had become a waiting room for judgment. The walls seemed to absorb every whisper, every sharp intake of breath, every sound of footsteps in the corridor. Even the furniture appeared to listen. Hercule Poirot noticed these things. He noticed everything. Morning brought rain, soft at first, then persistent. It blurred the view of the road outside and trapped the group indoors, forcing them into one another's presence. Inspector Hargreaves arrived early, his coat damp, his expression resolute. Today, he announced, we dig deeper. The surface has been skimmed. Now we look beneath. Poirot approved. Patterns, he knew, did not reveal themselves to haste. The inspector began with documents. He had requested bank statements, correspondence, anything that might explain Daniel Crow's recent behavior. Gerald Fenton's name appeared often in these papers. You lent Daniel money, Hargreaves said bluntly. Gerald stiffened. A modest amount. Repeatedly. Gerald's jaw tightened. He was unreliable, yes. But that hardly makes me a murderer. Did he threaten you? The inspector asked. Gerald hesitated, then shrugged. He hinted. Daniel always hinted. He enjoyed feeling powerful. Poirot leaned forward slightly. And did you feel powerless, Monsieur Fenton? Gerald shot him an irritated glance. I felt annoyed. Annoyance, Poirot thought, was rarely enough to kill. But fear often was. Miriam was questioned next, and for the first time, her composure faltered. You and Daniel argued recently, the inspector said. Miriam's voice was low. He accused me of influencing my husband. Of encouraging dishonesty. And did you? The inspector pressed. She looked up sharply. No. Poirot watched her carefully. There was honesty there, but also restraint. A woman used to silence. When Oliver was called in again, he looked exhausted. I've told you everything, he said weakly. Not quite, Poirot said gently. You said Daniel knew something about your school. But not what? Oliver swallowed. A mistake in grading. Years ago. It would ruin my reputation if exposed. And Daniel discovered this recently. Yes. Poirot nodded. And yet you say you turned back, leaving him alive. I did, Oliver insisted. I couldn't bear listening to him. Simon was last. He entered the room with a tight smile that did not reach his eyes. You were the organizer, the inspector said. You arranged the route. The stop was unplanned, but the road was known to you. Simon shrugged. I looked at maps. Anyone could. Poirot interjected softly. But not everyone studies them closely. Simon's smile flickered. The inspector paused. Daniel had an argument with you the night before the trip. Simon's jaw tightened. We disagreed. He wanted more money from our investment. And you refused. Yes. Did he threaten you? Simon exhaled slowly. He said he would bring everything into the light. A silence followed. Poirot's eyes met Simon's. And would the light have been uncomfortable for you? Simon did not answer immediately. Daniel exaggerated. He liked drama. Later that afternoon, Poirot requested permission to review the scene again alone. The inspector agreed. The rain had softened the ground, but the essentials remained. Poirot studied the hedgerow, the field, the slope of the land. He walked the distance from the coach to the place where Daniel had fallen. Slowly. Precisely. He stopped near the hedge and frowned. There, he murmured. The stone. It was not unique, but its position had been. Someone had placed it closer to the path than chance would allow. Not hidden, but not obvious. Ready. Poirot knelt carefully, despite the damp grass. He examined the ground beneath where the stone had rested. The earth was compressed. It waited, Poirot whispered. Just like the murderer. Back at the inn, tension reached a new pitch. Accusations no longer hid behind politeness. You keep looking at me, Gerald snapped at Oliver. Do you think I did it? Oliver flushed. I think any of us could have. Miriam rose abruptly from her chair and left the room, her face drawn. Clara alone remained calm, observing. Poirot joined her by the window. You watch them, he said. They are unraveling, she replied. Daniel had a talent for that. And you? Poirot asked. Did he unravel you? Clara hesitated. He tried. Poirot turned slightly toward her. And did he succeed? She met his gaze steadily. No. That evening, Inspector Hargreaves announced a troubling development. The newspapers have caught wind of the case, he said. There will be attention. Pressure. Gerald cursed under his breath. Oliver looked ill. Miriam pressed her hand to her mouth. Simon said nothing. Poirot watched him closely. The man's posture was controlled, his breathing steady. Too steady. As night fell, Poirot sat alone in the inn's small library, surrounded by old books and the smell of dust. He reviewed the facts again, arranging them like pieces on a chessboard. Daniel had planned to confront someone during the stop. Someone he trusted enough to follow into the field. The killer had acted quickly, confidently, without fear of discovery. This was not chaos. This was choreography. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. Poirot looked up. Simon stood in the doorway. Can't sleep? Simon asked. Poirot smiled politely. The mind, it does not always rest when it should. Simon hesitated. You think you know who did it? Poirot studied him for a long moment. I think, Poirot said carefully, that the pattern is becoming clear. Simon's face hardened. Patterns can be misleading. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed. Which is why one must be certain before speaking. Simon nodded once and left. Poirot remained seated, hands folded. The pattern was clear enough now. But one crucial thread still waited to be pulled. Chapter 5, A Convincing Falsehood. By the fifth day, the strain upon the group had become impossible to disguise. What had begun as polite discomfort had hardened into something brittle and dangerous. Words were chosen carefully now, glances measured, silences stretched thin. The inn at Mentham Cross no longer sheltered them, it exposed them. Inspector Hargreaves arrived just after breakfast with a new intensity in his manner. There was purpose in his step, and the constable who followed carried a thin folder beneath his arm. We've made progress, the inspector announced. Enough to focus our attention. Oliver Reed looked up sharply. On whom? Hargreaves did not answer at once. He took a chair, opened the folder, and laid its contents out carefully, as though presenting evidence in a court. "Mr. Reed," he said at last, "your conversation with Daniel Crowe in the field was longer than you initially stated." Oliver stiffened. "That's not true." "It is," the inspector replied calmly. "We tested the timing. The walk from the coach to where the body was found and back again takes longer than you claimed. Which means you were with Daniel for several minutes, not seconds." Oliver's face drained of color. I didn't think it mattered." "It matters very much," Hargreaves said. Murmurs rippled through the room. Gerald leaned back in his chair, arms folded, his expression grimly satisfied. Miriam watched Oliver with something like pity. Simon stared at the floor. Clara said nothing. Poirot, seated slightly apart, studied Oliver closely. Fear radiated from him, but fear, Poirot knew, could come from many causes. The inspector continued. "You admitted Daniel was blackmailing you. You were alone with him. And you were the one who found the body." Oliver shook his head violently. "That doesn't make me a murderer." "No," Hargreaves said. "But it does make you the most likely suspect." The words landed like a blow. "I couldn't have done it," Oliver whispered. "I'm not capable of that." Poirot leaned forward. "Mon ami," he said gently, "capability is not the same as guilt." But the inspector was unmoved. "For now," Hargreaves said, "Mr. Reed will remain under close supervision." Oliver looked around the room, desperate. No one met his gaze. That afternoon, the atmosphere shifted. The unspoken accusation became spoken, the suspicion given shape. Gerald avoided Oliver entirely. Miriam spoke to him only when necessary. Even Simon kept his distance. Clara, however, sat beside Oliver in the lounge. "You're frightened," she said quietly. "Yes," Oliver replied. "Because they're wrong." She studied him. "Daniel frightened you." "He did," Oliver admitted. "But fear doesn't turn me into a killer." Clara nodded slowly. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." Poirot observed this exchange from across the room. Clara's loyalty intrigued him. Later, Poirot sought out Inspector Hargreaves. "You are convinced?" Poirot asked. "I am convinced we have our man," the inspector replied. "Unless you have something better." Poirot hesitated. "I have something different." The inspector sighed. "You always do." Poirot asked permission to examine Oliver's clothing from the day of the murder. The inspector agreed reluctantly. In Oliver's jacket pocket, Poirot found nothing remarkable. But on the cuff, there was dried grass, light, brushed rather than crushed. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The stone had required strength. A single, heavy blow. Oliver was not weak, but he was hesitant by nature. And more importantly, the grass around Daniel's body showed no sign of a struggle, no dragging, no hesitation. The act had been swift. Decisive. Later that evening, Poirot invited all 5 remaining friends to gather in the inn's small drawing room. He did not announce his purpose. He simply asked. They came reluctantly. "I wish to speak," Poirot said. "Not to accuse, not yet. Only to clarify." Gerald scoffed. "We've clarified enough." Oliver did it. Oliver flinched. Poirot raised a hand. "Let us consider something." The murderer struck Daniel from behind. He did not fear being seen. He did not hesitate. Poirot's gaze moved slowly across the faces. "This is not the crime of a man cornered," he continued. "It is the crime of a man prepared. Simon shifted slightly. Poirot noticed. The stone, Poirot said, was placed in advance. That means the murderer expected the opportunity. Miriam inhaled sharply. Gerald frowned. You're suggesting this was planned? OUI, Poirot said simply. Not long in advance, but enough. Oliver looked up. Then it wasn't me. Poirot met his eyes kindly. I do not believe it was. A silence followed. Inspector Hargreaves stiffened. You're undermining my case. I am correcting it, Poirot replied calmly. The inspector folded his arms. Then name your alternative. Poirot did not answer. Not yet. That night, the rain returned, heavy against the windows. Poirot remained awake in his room, listening to the sound. A false trail, he thought, is often the most convincing one. It satisfies logic too quickly. It explains without understanding. Oliver Reed was the false trail. But who had laid it? Poirot reviewed every movement again. Simon by the coach. Clara observing. Gerald smoking. Miriam inside. But one detail now stood out. Simon had organized the trip. Simon had known the road. Simon had remained calm, too calm. Poirot rose and paced slowly. Daniel had planned to confront someone during the stop. Someone with something significant to lose. Someone who needed the confrontation to end quickly. Poirot stopped pacing. The truth was nearly ready. But before it could be spoken, the murderer would make one last mistake. And Poirot intended to be watching when it happened. Chapter 6: Pressure and Fractures. The morning that followed Inspector Hargreaves's narrowing of the case dawned clear and sharp. The rain washed from the sky as though the countryside wished to appear innocent once more. Inside the inn, however, nothing felt clean. Suspicion clung to every surface. Oliver Reed was no longer permitted to wander freely. A constable remained discreetly nearby, never touching him, never speaking unless spoken to, yet always present. The effect was worse than handcuffs. Oliver's shoulders sagged under the invisible weight of it. Hercule Poirot watched all of this from a distance. Pressure, he knew, revealed character. And character, when strained, betrayed truth. At breakfast, Gerald spoke loudly, deliberately avoiding Oliver's side of the table. It's only sensible, he said, stirring his tea with unnecessary force. The facts are obvious. Miriam did not reply. She ate little, her appetite diminished by the atmosphere more than the food. Clara sat upright, calm as ever, though her eyes missed nothing. Simon arrived last. He looked tired but composed, his movements economical, his voice steady as he greeted the inspector. Too steady, Poirot thought again. Inspector Hargreaves wasted no time. We've received confirmation, he said. Daniel Crowe withdrew a substantial sum of money 3 days before the trip. The funds came from a joint account. Gerald frowned. Joint with whom? Hargreaves looked down at his notes. With Simon Blake. The room stilled. Simon did not react immediately. Then he laughed softly. Yes, well, we were business partners. That's hardly a revelation. Daniel planned to demand more. Hargreaves asked. He always did, Simon replied. That was his way. Poirot watched Simon's hands. They rested flat on the table, relaxed. No fidgeting. No tension. Interesting. Later that morning, Poirot requested a private word with Miriam. She hesitated, then agreed. They sat in a small parlour overlooking the village green. You are observant, Poirot said gently. More than you pretend. Miriam smiled faintly. One learns to be. Daniel Crowe frightened you, Poirot said. She did not deny it. He enjoyed causing trouble. Especially between people. And between husband and wife. Her lips tightened. Yes. Poirot nodded. And yet you stayed on the coach during the stop. I felt sick, Miriam said quietly. But also, I didn't want to hear what he planned to say. Poirot's eyes sharpened. You knew he planned a confrontation. Yes, she admitted. He told Gerald the night before. He wanted witnesses. Witnesses, Poirot repeated softly. How theatrical. Miriam looked away. Daniel liked control. After she left, Poirot remained seated, considering. Daniel had wanted an audience. But he had met death instead. In the afternoon, tension erupted. Oliver, pale and trembling, confronted Simon in the corridor. You let them think it was me, Oliver said. You know I didn't do it. Simon's face hardened. I don't know anything of the sort. You were calm, Oliver insisted. Too calm. Even then. Watch yourself, Simon said sharply. You're in no position to accuse anyone. Their raised voices drew attention. Inspector Hargreaves intervened quickly, separating them. But Poirot had seen enough. That evening, Poirot asked the inspector for one more examination of the coach. Reluctantly, permission was granted. The vehicle stood behind the inn, silent and empty. Poirot walked its length slowly. He examined the steps, the storage compartments, the aisle. Then he smiled. Beneath the driver's seat, he found a small smear of dried mud, distinct from the road's gravel, darker, heavier. The same kind of mud clung faintly to Simon's shoe. Poirot straightened, his expression grave. Later, he encountered Clara in the garden. You see it now, she said quietly. Poirot looked at her with interest. You have seen it for some time. She nodded. Daniel told me. About Simon. About the money. He asked me to be there when he confronted him. Poirot absorbed this. But you were not. No, Clara said. Because Simon asked me to stay by the coach. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. Everything aligned. That night, Poirot wrote careful notes. The timing. The placement of the stone. The calm. The control. The preparation masked as coincidence. Simon Blake had known where the stop would be. He had known Daniel's intentions. He had ensured witnesses were absent. Oliver was the distraction. The falsehood had been convincing because it was convenient. Poirot folded his notebook. Tomorrow, he would speak. And when he did, the carefully constructed calm would finally fracture. Chapter 7, The Edge of Truth. The announcement came shortly after breakfast. Inspector Hargreaves, his voice formal but edged with relief, informed the group that Hercule Poirot had requested a final meeting that evening. A conclusion? Gerald asked sharply. A clarification, the inspector replied. Monsieur Poirot believes all relevant facts can now be addressed. Oliver's face lifted with cautious hope. Miriam clasped her hands tightly. Simon's expression did not change. Clara alone appeared unsurprised. Throughout the day, the inn seemed suspended in a strange calm. No one wandered far. Conversations were brief and careful. It was as if everyone sensed that the invisible thread binding them together was about to snap. Poirot spent the morning in solitude, arranging his thoughts with the same care he applied to his appearance. Facts, he reminded himself, were not enough. One must present them in the right order, so that the truth revealed itself as inevitable rather than dramatic. In the early afternoon, Inspector Hargreaves informed Oliver that the close supervision would be lifted temporarily. Oliver nearly collapsed with relief. "Thank you," he whispered. "I only want this to end." "It will," Poirot assured him softly. That assurance did not extend to everyone. Later, Poirot encountered Simon in the corridor. Simon offered a polite smile. "I hear you're fond of theatre," Simon said lightly. "A final performance tonight." Poirot returned the smile, though his eyes remained cool. "Theatre requires illusion. This, monsieur, requires clarity." Simon's gaze lingered for a fraction too long before he moved on. Poirot took note. As evening approached, the group assembled in the inn's drawing room. Lamps cast warm pools of light, but the atmosphere remained tense. The inspector stood near the door. The constable waited outside. Poirot remained seated until everyone had settled. Then he rose. "My friends," he began gently, "we have traveled together, not only on the road, but through fear, suspicion, and grief. Before the law completes its work, it is important that the truth is understood." He turned first to Oliver. "You were suspected because you were convenient," Poirot said. "You had motive, opportunity, and you found the body. But convenience is not proof." Oliver swallowed hard. Poirot continued. "You left Daniel alive. The grass at the scene shows no struggle. Your clothing bore no marks of violence. And most importantly, you lack the temperament for sudden, decisive brutality." Oliver's eyes filled with tears. Poirot then turned to Gerald. "You were loud in your certainty. That is often a mask for fear." Gerald bristled. "Are you accusing me now?" "None," Poirot said calmly. "You feared exposure, yes. But you also feared scandal. Murder brings scandal. You would not choose it." Miriam shifted in her chair. "You knew a confrontation was coming," Poirot said to her. "But you avoided it. That is the action of self-preservation, not violence." Poirot's gaze moved slowly, deliberately, to Simon. Simon met it without flinching. "You were the organizer," Poirot said. "You controlled the route. You knew the road. You knew Daniel's intention to confront you. And you ensured others would not follow." Simon folded his arms. "This is speculation." Poirot smiled faintly. "Speculation ends where facts begin." He stepped closer. The stone was placed in advance. The blow was confident. The murderer was calm enough to return to the coach without visible distress. Only one of you demonstrated such control. Simon's jaw tightened. "But tonight," Poirot continued, "I do not yet accuse." A ripple of surprise passed through the room. "No," Poirot said. "Because something remains to be observed." He gestured toward the inspector. "This afternoon, we allowed freedom. Pressure was released. And when pressure is released..." Poirot paused. "Truth moves." A sudden sound interrupted him, a sharp clatter from the corridor outside. The constable called out. Poirot turned. "Ah," he murmured. "There it is." Inspector Hargreaves stepped outside briefly, then returned, his face grim. "Someone attempted to leave the inn," he said. All eyes turned. Simon stood abruptly. "This is absurd." Poirot looked at him steadily. "You were calm until now." Simon's composure cracked, not fully, but enough. "I didn't plan this," Simon snapped. "Daniel forced me." Silence fell. Poirot raised a hand gently. "Not yet, monsieur. That is for tomorrow." Simon sank back into his chair, breathing hard. Poirot addressed the room once more. Tonight, he said softly, we stand at the edge of truth. Tomorrow, we step across it. He bowed slightly and sat down. No one spoke. Outside, the inn settled into uneasy stillness. Somewhere in the building, a door closed quietly. Poirot folded his hands. The final piece had shifted. The truth, patient as ever, was ready to be spoken aloud. Chapter 8 of Poirot Speaks. The drawing room felt smaller than it had the night before. Morning light filtered through the curtains, pale and honest, leaving no place for shadows to hide. Inspector Hargreaves stood near the fireplace, his notebook ready. The constable waited by the door. The 5 remaining friends sat together, though no longer as a group, each seemed enclosed within a private circle of tension. Hercule Poirot rose slowly from his chair. "My friends," he said, his voice calm and measured, "today we finish what began on that quiet road." No one spoke. "You have all suffered," Poirot continued. "Fear, suspicion, grief. But truth, though it may wound, also releases." He turned first to Oliver Reed. "You were accused because the facts appeared to point toward you. You followed Daniel. You feared him. You found him." Poirot paused. "But appearance is not reality." Oliver clenched his hands together. "The murder required decisiveness," Poirot said. "A single, powerful blow. No hesitation. No struggle. You, monsieur, hesitate by nature. Your fear made you flee, not strike." Oliver's shoulders sagged, a weight lifting. Poirot then faced Gerald Fenton. "You feared exposure," Poirot said. "But you also feared scandal. Murder guarantees scandal. You are a man who protects himself with noise and certainty, not blood." Gerald opened his mouth, then closed it again. Poirot turned to Miriam. "You knew Daniel planned a confrontation. You avoided it. You chose distance, not violence. Fear, yes, but fear of chaos, not of truth." Miriam's eyes glistened, but she nodded. Finally, Poirot turned to Simon Blake. The room seemed to hold its breath. "You," Poirot said softly, "had the most to lose." Simon met his gaze. "That's your conclusion?" "It is the inevitable one," Poirot replied. He began to walk slowly as he spoke, arranging his words like pieces in a puzzle. "Daniel Crowe had discovered that you were diverting funds from your shared investment. Not for luxury, not for greed, but to cover earlier losses. Losses you believed temporary. Losses you intended to repair." Simon's face hardened. "Daniel demanded more money," Poirot continued. "But more than that, he demanded control. He planned a confrontation during the journey. He told several people. He wanted witnesses." Poirot stopped. "You knew this." Simon said nothing. "You organized the trip," Poirot went on. "You chose the route. And when the breakdown occurred, by chance, yes, you recognized opportunity." Poirot raised a finger. "But opportunity alone does not kill. Preparation does." He gestured toward the inspector. The stone was placed near the hedge before Daniel arrived there. It did not roll naturally into position. It waited. Simon shifted. "You spoke with the driver," Poirot said. "You ensured others remained near the coach. You asked your sister, Clara, to stay close. You removed witnesses." Clara lowered her eyes. "Daniel followed Oliver into the field," Poirot said. "As you expected. When Oliver turned back, Daniel remained, alone, angry, confident. You followed." Simon's breathing quickened. "You struck from behind," Poirot said gently. "One blow. No struggle. Daniel trusted you. That trust killed him. Simon stood abruptly. He was going to ruin me. Poirot inclined his head. Yes. And that fear gave you strength. Inspector Hargreaves stepped forward. Mr. Blake. Poirot raised a hand. One moment. He looked at Simon with something almost like sadness. You returned to the coach calm, Poirot said. Too calm. You allowed suspicion to settle upon Oliver because it suited you. You said nothing when the false trail formed. Simon's shoulders slumped. I didn't plan to kill him, Simon whispered. I just needed him to stop. Poirot's voice softened. Murder is often born of such words. The inspector nodded to the constable. Simon did not resist as he was taken away. As he reached the door, he turned once. I thought I was in control, he said quietly. Poirot met his gaze. Control, he replied, is an illusion. The door closed. Silence filled the room. Oliver let out a long breath, almost a sob. Miriam covered her face. Gerald stared at the floor. Clara sat very still. Inspector Hargreaves approached Poirot. Thank you, he said simply. Poirot nodded. It was necessary. Later, as the others dispersed, Clara remained behind. You saw it early, she said. Poirot smiled faintly. I suspected. But certainty requires patience. She hesitated. Daniel wasn't kind. But he didn't deserve that. No one does, Poirot replied. As Poirot prepared to leave Mendham Cross, the countryside looked much as it had on the morning of the journey, peaceful, untroubled. But Poirot knew better. The road remembered. He adjusted his moustache and stepped forward, carrying with him the quiet knowledge that truth, once spoken, cannot be taken back, but it can, at last, set others free.